Hello, sixth graders. Welcome to Lesson 6, Climates Around the World. You should have your guided notes packet, and where it says Learning Target, just write in the blanks. I can interpret and compare climographs from different latitudes and locations. So if you look on your notes, they kind of mirror the slides. Some will skip, but most of them will go along with what you see here. So what are climates? Well, a climate is an area or region's average monthly precipitation and temperature. So it's two things combined into one. And remember that precipitation is any liquid or frozen water that forms in the atmosphere and comes back to Earth. So rain, sleet, snow. So if you want to just even write down rain, sleet, snow to remind yourself, that's fine. And here we can see many of the climates. So you'll have written those down in the boxes on your notes. Now, on the same page, you're going to see this. There are 5 basic climates. So put the number 5 on your paper. And then I'm just going to briefly go over them. They are tropical, which is kind of this peachy red, dry, which is kind of a goldy color, temperate, which is the green, and you see them here and then down here, continental, which is the like lighter blue, and then polar, which is the darker blue. So down here in Antarctica and here in Greenland. So those are just the 5 basics. We're going to go into more detail on them in just a few minutes. Okay, so our dry or arid is another name for dry climate. That's this like golden yellow, and dry climates could be any temperature. They could be cooler, but the key is that they have very low precipitation, so never, hardly any rain, probably never any snow. So that's what dry is. So just jot that down where it says dry. Okay, our second type of climate that we're going to talk about is a temperate climate. Now, a temperate climate is this green. So if you think of kind of Michigan's a little bit in there, Europe is green, parts of Asia, but it's moderate temperatures. So it's warm some months, but it could also be hot some months. Or it can be cold. So if we think of, January in Michigan, or it could be cool. And then there's moderate precipitation throughout. So, you do get snow and rain and that type of thing, but not usually a ton at once. Okay, next we're going to talk about the continental climate, which is this blue area. And that is warm during some months and then extremely cold during some months, or extremely hot during some months and cold during some months. And typically there is low precipitation. And again, it's found a little bit more north, and then some is a little bit in the south here. The polar climate, that is consistently low temperatures and consistently low to no precipitation. So if you think of Antarctica and Greenland, kind of like an ice block is basically what that is. For this slide, I want to talk a little bit about tropical temperatures. Now, the tropical temperatures are, tropical climate is near the equator, and they tend to be very hot, and they tend to have moderate rainfall. So you think of your rainforest and that type of thing, they're in the tropical climate. Now, you don't have this slide on your notes, but if you look here, this red line represents, whoops, sorry about that. The red line represents the equator. The dashed lines, Tropic of Cancer, Tropic of Capricorn, and then up here, we've got the Antarctic Circle, or the Arctic Circle and the Antarctic Circle down here. So they get progressively further from the equator. So just kind of keep that in mind as we're studying this. What I'd like you to do right now is take a break, stand up and take a little walk, stretch, make sure that you've got everything in your notes, and then come back for part 2. Okay, welcome back to part 2. We're going to take a look at something called a climograph in this part. Okay, so what is a climograph? Well, first of all, it is a tool. It's a graph, And it's a geographer's tool that shows a specific area or region's average monthly precipitation and temperature. So both things. So if you'll notice, um, here is an example of a bigger example of a climograph. On the left over here, this is typically temperature and it's shown in red. And the red line measures the temperature and shows the trend for temperature. The blue on this side is either inches or millimeters or something of rainfall, and it's typically a bar graph, and that shows the rainfall. So two things are shown on this graph. Um, there's a title usually up at the top, so this one's talking to us about Detroit. And then along the bottom of our graph is months. So that is a climate graph. And so together these can tell us if the climate of an area is hot or moderate or cold and wet or moderate and dry. It just tells us a lot of information. All right, so let's take a look at some climographs. So they could be different all over the world. Here's one that shows the city of Brasilia in Brazil. And if we look at it, this shows us that the climate is typically pretty steady. 20, I think, is around 80 degrees Fahrenheit. So this is at Celsius. We don't typically look at Celsius, but so that means it's pretty warm. And then the rain, it's rainy for some months, but then gets really dry in other months. So it's kind of one extreme, one extreme to the other. And then we just talked about Detroit, which is a very different climograph than this. Okay, so this represents a tropical climate graph. Um, so tropical again is usually hot. It's a seasonal extreme. Um, they've got consistently hot weather, high precipitation some months, so look here, and then super low precipitation during other months. This represents the Congo, which is in Africa. So it's in that tropical climate zone, and you can see it's warm. Okay, the arid or dry climate. This one is Cairo, Egypt. Um, it's a mixed. It could be any temperature. It could be high, low, or it could vary daily or seasonally or whatever. But the key here, and look at this precipitation. Look at the bar graph. Look at the millimeters of rain. They get barely any at all. So that's the key to what a dry climate graph might look like. A temperate climate graph is moderate during the season, so it's moderate seasonal. Warm or hot some months, cooler, cold or cool during some months, but kind of consistent precipitation. So if we look at the bar graph, it's never super low, but it's never super high, so it's pretty consistent. And then temperatures can vary, right? Here it's a warmer month, here it's a colder month, and this is in New Zealand. Okay, our continental climate graph, if we look at Canada, think of Manitoba, Winnipeg. For all of you hockey fans, those Winnipeg Jets, that's where they're located. But it's got a seasonal extreme, but then low precipitation. So it could be warm or it could be hot. Up here it's at 20, which again I think is in the 80s because we're at degrees Celsius. It could be extremely cold. Look at we've got negative 14 in December here. And then precipitation is fairly low. It could get a little bit moderate, but not a ton of precipitation. And remember, precipitation is the blue and the blue bar graph, and temperature is the red along this side and the red line. All right, polar. So if you think of Antarctica, that's a polar climate. And low and low. So think of those two things. It's got low temperatures consistently and low precipitation to no precipitation consistently. And we can see that from the graph. Here's our temperature. All the temperatures are below zero. So this is pretty cold. The climograph doesn't get that high. Average precipitation June, July is somewhere in, I don't know, 30 millimeters, but millimeters are super tiny. So, during May, June, July, that might be their highest time, but still not very much at all. Okay, so we've reviewed the 5 basic climates and they're listed here. So tropical, dry, temperate, continental, and polar. And then here you see how the map of the climates. So I want you to think about, how does climate relate to location on our map? So think about where the equator is, think about where the Arctic Circle is, and answer that question in 3 to 5 sentences. And now you should know all about latitude, longitude, and climographs.